The time is just gone 8:35 a.m. We continue with the show this morning, and it's time now to look at developments out of Africa. We're looking at Sudan this morning, and Sudan taking this first step towards joining the International Criminal Court. We're joined by independent political analyst Ayesha Kajee this morning. Now, Ayesha, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome and great having you with us on the show this morning. Ayesha,
Thank
let's
you.
just talk about the relevance of Sudan taking the step to join the ICC. What are some of the issues that have been playing out in the background that have led to this decision?
Well, the step to join the ICC is a really significant one, both for Sudan domestically as well as for the region, and of course, as part of the global community. The background to this is that former President al-Bashir and four others have been wanted by the ICC for several years now, but of course, up until this new dispensation came into being 2 years ago with the overthrow of Bashir's government by the military and then the formation of a transitional council and transitional government, Sudan was very, very opposed to the ICC. It signed the Rome Statute in 2000 and then a few months later withdrew its participation in the International Criminal Court. So currently Sudan is not a signatory to the ICC. But this step is the first, as you said, in getting it to become a signatory. What the implications for that will be is it will show political will on the part of the judiciary and the government to comply with international norms. So it will enhance the reputation of Sudan in the region and internationally. More importantly, domestically, victims of the atrocities in Darfur, for which Mr. Bashir and some of his cohorts are wanted, will feel that justice may finally be getting a start in the right direction. So victims and families of victims, remember that the UN says 300,000 people were killed in the Darfur conflict. Some call it a Darfur genocide, which was largely sponsored by the then government, the government of Mr. Omar al-Bashir. So 300,000 people at the minimum. Human rights groups estimate that as many as 1 million may have died. And gone unreported. And about 2.5 million or more have been displaced both internally and regionally. So this is not a small deal. Many Sudanese in the Darfur region have been affected by the atrocities committed by government-sponsored militia in that region from around early 2003 up to about 2008. So when Mr. Bashir was indicted by the court in 2009, that was a step in the right direction. But of course, with Sudan not being a member of the court and not giving it any relevance or significance, it at that point was unlikely that Mr. al-Bashir would ever be brought to justice. However, now that he's in prison in Khartoum, and now that this government has taken the first steps, it's a positive sign, a step in the right direction. However, the cabinet has unanimously voted in this direction, but it needs to be ratified by the Transitional Council. And currently, the Transitional Council in Sudan has many members of the former government and notably one notorious warlord, very powerful man, Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, also popularly known as Hemiti, who was a military commander very close to the government in Darfur, allegedly responsible for at least commanding the Janjaweed in that region. He's got very strong ties with Chad. His uncle is a chieftain in the region. Some people allege that he was actually born in Chad and then came to Sudan. He's got quite a checkered history, Hemiti. And he's the man who will be probably shaking in his boots right now, because if Sudan does accede to the Rome Statute of the ICC, he's probably quite close in the firing line for further indictments.
Well, Aisha, very interesting dynamics obviously playing out in Sudan. But I think the key issue here is when one looks at genocide, against people. And when we talk about justice and accountability, now obviously the Sudanese government has looked at this as a starting point in terms of achieving their justice and to hold those accountable who were responsible for the genocide. But sometimes it is not straightforward because there are other challenges, and we know in South Africa, just one man, Jacob Zuma, being incarcerated, and we know what that had basically caused. And sadly, this is an African thing.
Absolutely. And while, for example, people like Hamiti, other members of the Transitional Council, like Ali Osman Taha, for example, have very strong support in the capital and also outside Sudan. For example, they're very close to the Emirati and Saudi governments, who themselves are not, of course, members of the International Criminal Court and would not want to see this kind of precedent being set in Sudan. At the same time, there are very, very many civilians in Sudan who would like to see such people brought to justice. So there is a mixed bag of opinion currently. The possible further indictments of the ICC may be a deciding factor and perhaps a compromise, which many people will not like, but perhaps a compromise might be to grant some kind of limited amnesty to the people currently on the Transitional Council in order for this to go forward. Remember that one person has handed himself over to the International Criminal Court, and former ICC prosecutor, when she visited Sudan for the second time in May this year, indicated that Al-Khushaib will be brought to trial fairly soon. Of course, now it's in the hands of the new ICC prosecutor, Karim. And we're going to wait to see, what steps he takes to expedite this case. Because Sudan's not currently a member of the Rome Statute, it could be a long process. So another reason for Sudan to accede to the International Criminal Court would be to bring Khoshaib to justice fairly soon. At the moment, the case against Bashir, Khoshaib, and 3 others was brought to the ICC by the United Nations, which is one way of actually bringing cases to the ICC. But if the country in which these criminals currently reside is a member of the ICC, it makes that process easier, simpler, and hopefully, one hopes, faster.
Well, as you mentioned, faster, and I think timing is absolutely critical. And, we have been talking about the first step, and as you correctly pointed out, that this decision still needs to be ratified. It still needs to be approved by the Sovereign Council. So timing is absolutely critical. The sooner, the better. And obviously, after that, the ball can basically get rolling, Aisha.
Absolutely. But bear in mind, as I said earlier, that people on the Transitional Council who might possibly be indicted still have a lot of support, particularly in the Nilote region and particularly in the urban centers like Khartoum, as well as in the border regions between Chad and Sudan, where, as I pointed out, Dagalo, for example, has huge support, and his family has traditionally been chieftains in that area. So any attempt to join the ICC or to ratify this decision by the cabinet to join the ICC might well spark reactions, riots, protests. I don't want to put ideas in people's minds, but might well spark reactions in the Sudanese capital and also in the border region. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, because Hemiti has such support in the Gulf amongst the Emiratis and the Saudis, such uprisings could conceivably be supported financially and in armament terms by those regimes who have their own stakes in not wanting to see the Sudanese culpable for the genocide in Darfur brought to justice.
Well, Aisha, we're certainly going to be following developments, but for now, we're going to have to leave it at that. As always, we thank you. We appreciate your time with us here on Salam Media. We wish you all the best, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Shukran jazilan. Assalamu alaikum.
Ayesha Kajee joining us this morning, independent political analyst on providing an update on the latest with regards to Sudan.